recording on this computer. So don't say anything you'll be embarrassed about later. Sorry. The theory of comparative advantage is very old and compelling to economists. And I do want to go over it today. And, you know, I think I have it. Do I have it ready? Where is it? Sorry, here we go. It's loading. But before I say too much about it, international trade and this theory, I do want to say maybe why it matters and some basic ideas about it. So let's talk about that now. I need to share the proper screen with you. Here we go. International trade. You guys can all see this on the screen. It says international trade, etc. Okay, my first slide is a cautionary tale, and it's a tweet from Donald Trump in 2018. And unfortunately, I feel like we just have to talk about it because he was our president for 4 years. This is what he says. When a country is losing many billions of dollars on trade with virtually every country it does business with, trade wars are good and easy to win. Example, when we are down 100 billion with a certain country and they get cute, don't trade anymore. We win big. It's easy. Okay, so this was the president of our country at the time saying that trade wars are good. So I do want to talk about what a trade war is, why it is not good, and how what he's talking about here, don't trade anymore, we win big, is like very easy to show why that is just false. So I want to contradict, at least in economic terms. I'm talking about the politics, but just some of the economics that I'm teaching you in this lecture in particular about trade wars and international trade. Okay. So with that goal in mind, let's start with some basic ideas of international trade. The production I can't see you guys anymore. I'm a little worried here. I want to be able to see if you guys are still with me. You guys here? Following?
Yep.
The production possibility frontier. Great, thank you. It says it's basically a line on a graph that says what are the possible things that a country collectively can produce given its resources. That's called the production possibility frontier. If you've learned about international economics before, or macroeconomics even, you've probably seen that. Opportunity cost is another very simple concept. It's what must be given up to receive one more unit of something. That's the opportunity cost of something. And then you have these things, absolute advantage, comparative advantage. That's when we're comparing countries, saying which one is better, which one can produce more of something. Absolute means I can produce more in actual terms, but comparative advantage, the one that we care about actually, is when one country can produce at a lower opportunity cost than another country. I'll explain that soon. And closed versus open, generally that just means if economy is closed, it's only producing and consuming its own goods. It's not trading with any other country. So everything it produces, it consumes right there in its own country. Whereas an open economy is the opposite. You can produce something here, sell it overseas. Something can be produced overseas and you buy it, import it, and you consume it here. So these are just the basic concepts of international trade that hopefully you know. Do you have a question, Thomas?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Are there any examples of closed economies?
I'm sure there are. North Korea is pretty close, isn't it? That's not true though, because North Korea does trade with China
and Russia, and they export pirated Nintendo games.
Yeah. So nowadays, I think there are no more examples. There were in the past. I can't think of any.
Yeah, I was just curious.
This is a good question. Like, you know, and remember, these are the extremes. Closed economy is literally no trade with any other country. Open is no trade barriers with any other country. Everything just can flow freely in and out. The reality is every country is somewhere in between. But I don't know, to me, North Korea comes to mind as a pretty close to closed economy, but not closed. Good question. Let's go to the next slide. So the basic economic theory of international trade is this. All countries have a comparative advantage in something. And specialization in industry with comparative advantage. That's a sentence fragment. Let me explain that a little bit. The theory says if you're a country and you specialize in whatever you have a comparative advantage in, and then you engage in international trade, what will happen? It'll be beneficial to you and the other country. Both countries can benefit. It's either a Kaldor-Hicks improvement if you can really compensate the people. If, in theory, you could compensate them, but you don't. But it's a Pareto improvement if you actually compensate whatever losers there are in one particular industry. What do I mean by that? Let's go back to NAFTA. The American automobile manufacturing industry was harmed by NAFTA. They suffered losses. If you worked in a factory in Ohio, I'm from Ohio. I actually think there were some factories that closed in Ohio. And you could argue what happened to those jobs? They were outsourced. They were now being produced in Mexico. And even if you don't compensate those people who lost their jobs, it's still a Kaldor-Hicks improvement, meaning that in theory, hypothetically, you could compensate them. It's a Pareto improvement. Just remember the distinction between those two. Pareto means literally no one has been made worse off. So anybody who lost their job would have to get somehow subsidized by the government to make up for that lost job, which generally does not happen in free trade, right? I'm going to give you some examples today. I'd love to give you a numerical example, even though I don't have a whiteboard. I'll have to just do it on Zoom. But I think I can do it if you're patient with me, to show you how it's conceivable to have this truly Pareto improvement, both countries better off. And I'm going to sort of ignore the details of how that happens. Like, what about the people who lost their job in manufacturing? Do they get a new job in some other industry? And how does that work? Those are the details that we economists just wave our hands. We're not that concerned with those. That's for the policymakers to figure out, not for the economics example. So here, I have this C example of planes and cars with Germany and the US. Okay. When I say C example, I mean the example of me writing it on the board, but we have no board. What we have is this whiteboard here. Oops, it's got some other stuff on it. Right now you're seeing these two lines of A, B, and C, right? Apologize for that. I want to get rid of those. Michael knows what those are for because he was in my previous class. I'm going to draw, I kind of wish this was black. Nope. No, undo. Okay, now I can draw a black line. What I want to draw now is a production possibilities frontier. Have you guys seen these before? In theory, they could have as many axes as you want. It could be multiple dimensions, but in practice, it's easy just to do 2 dimensions. And you could think of each axis, the x-axis and the y-axis. You could think of it as being an entire sector of your economy, or you could think of it as basically whatever you want, whatever you're particularly interested in studying. But for the purposes of this example, I want to pick 2 industries that are related, but not the same. And one is the automotive industry. I'll call it cars on this axis, and we'll call them airplanes on this axis. Okay, so you can imagine a country that has certain amount of resources of rubber and steel and glass and machinery that can produce the same type of thing, could either produce a car or a plane. And there is a trade-off. If I want to produce more cars, I'm going to produce fewer planes. More planes, fewer cars. That's what I'm calling the opportunity cost, which you should call that too. That's what it is. Now I want to talk about two closed economies. And for illustrative purposes, let's call them the US and Germany, because that's my example that I have on the slides. What color do I want to make the US? We're red, white, and blue. How about blue? Okay, so who's better, the US or Germany? We're definitely better, right? We're better than Germany. Let's say we're like this. And this is, I want to get my numbers the same. I think it was 40 planes. And here, right here, maybe 400 cars. I mean, okay, these numbers seem small, right? But what are these intercepts saying? If I wanted to, I could make, if I wanted to only make planes, I could produce 40 planes. If I wanted to produce only cars, I could produce 400 cars. But actually, this blue line represents all of the points in between where I could also produce. Okay, that's the PPF. So the blue is the American PPF. Maybe I want the text to be smaller, huh? I don't have my US PPF. I wish it were blue. There we go. Blue is the US PPF. I also want to make one for Germany. I don't know, Germany has red in its flag, so let's do that. And let's say they can make, I do have numbers here. It's going to be kind of a lot fewer planes, but half as many cars. Here we go. Why didn't it turn red? I don't know the answer. Turn red, you. There we go. There's a red, and that's the Germany PPF. Let's say they can make 10 planes and they can make 200 cars. And remember, that's if they devoted all their resources to planes, they'd make 10. If they devoted all their resources to cars, they make 200. So now my question, should I label this as red being the German PPF? Okay. My question now is, who has the absolute advantage in planes? Who has the absolute advantage in cars? Who has the comparative advantage in planes? Who has a comparative advantage in cars? Does anybody already know the answer to these questions without me telling you? We're now talking about international trade. And then in international trade, you have this concept of an absolute advantage and comparative advantage. So given these PPFs that I've just drawn, can you, oh shoot, is there somebody waiting to come in? I didn't see that until just now. Must not have, hopefully it wasn't there too long. Anybody have a guess, willing to say? Somebody chatted.
US has absolute advantage for both products, but Germany has comparative advantage for cars.
That's exactly right. Everyone see how Michael got that? He said US has the absolute advantage in both because they could produce more planes than Germany. They can produce more cars than Germany. But Germany has the comparative advantage in cars. Why? It's actually, you can look at it as the slope of this line, but really you can look at it as the opportunity cost. How costly is it for Germany to produce one car in terms of its planes? It's actually lower. It has to give up. So Germany gives up how many, well, let's see. Let's just get this ratio here. It's 20 cars 20 cars for one plane, right? And it goes both ways. Whereas the US will give up 10 cars for one plane and vice versa. I'll write that here. What I'm really doing is writing the opportunity cost of cars and planes. Okay, so US has an absolute advantage. It actually also has a comparative advantage in planes, right? Because for planes, it gives up, it only costs it 10 cars to get one plane, whereas for Germany, they have to give up 20 cars for one plane. So US has the lower opportunity cost in planes, so it has the comparative advantage in planes. Should I write that there? Comparative advantage in planes. Whereas Germany gives up 20 cars for one plane, they have a comparative advantage in cars. This one's a little weird to talk about because we're talking about fractions. In order for it to make one car, it has to give up 1/20th of a plane, whereas the US has to give up 1/10th of a plane. Germany has a lower opportunity cost for cars. Oops. Beep, beep, beep. Comparative advantage in cars. So I want to stop here and ask if anybody has any questions about how I got these two ideas of comparative advantage. It's the first example that I've shown you of how you might be able to think about or measure comparative advantage. Any questions? Somebody raise their hand. Yeah, you have a question? It's Thomas, right? Yeah.
Just to make sure I understand it, so Germany has comparative advantage in cars because it's essentially cheaper for them to produce cars.
Well, cheaper in terms of how many planes it has to give up, right?
All right.
Once again, we're assuming these are the only two goods it can produce. So in this respect, it has to give up 1/20th of a plane to get a car, whereas the US has to give up 1/10th. So what's the lower cost? 1/20th is smaller than 1/10th. So Germany has the comparative advantage in cars. Would you like me to write that here too?
If you wouldn't mind, just so I could.
Like 1/20 is smaller than 1/10.
Thank you.
Whereas up here, for the Americans, we have, I can't see because of this. We have the comparative advantage in planes because 10 is less than 20. Right? 10 car, it has to give up 10 cars to make a plane. Germany has to give up 20 cars to make a plane. Okay. I'm glad you asked because there is math involved, but it's like, it's not important that you have this fraction in mind. It's more, what do I have to give up to make this thing? And I'm going to go back to this, what I said before about every country has a comparative advantage in something. Do you guys see why that is? There's no way you could draw these slopes where it's not like whatever country has a comparative advantage in one thing, the other one should have it in the other. That'll always be true. Okay. Now I want to talk about a closed economy. Closed economy. Let me draw a little dot here and say, let's say both countries decide they want to get half of each. So this is red is where they do this. And okay, let's make it blue here. Right here. This is what they actually produce. They actually kind of produce half and half. Those dots are meant to be what is consumed and produced. Remember, in a closed economy, whatever you produce is also what you consume as a country. My question now is it possible for both countries to produce and to consume more cars and more planes than these dots? By opening their economy, can we make it so that I'd love to do a little like dashed line here. I don't think I can do dashed lines, but I'm gonna try anyway. Here you go, dash, dash, dash. What I'm doing now is creating a region which is up and to the right of this blue dot. And I'm also going to create a region which is up and to the right of this red dot. Up and to the right is important because that's how you get more of each, more of both. And the question is it possible for Germany to consume somewhere up and to the right of this red dot, and for the US to consume somewhere up and to the right of this blue dot? It seems impossible, right? Where they could both just get more of each good. How could that happen? They still have the same production. The production, well, you can shift your production, but you still have the same PPF. Anybody have any comments about whether this is possible or how it's possible? Maybe for the interest of time, I should just say, yes, it is possible. And then I want to show you how it's possible. Okay? Does anybody have any questions on how or why? I think I already told you the answer of that is possible. And I also told you how. The answer is specialization. So what do I mean by specialization? It means each country should shift its production toward whatever good it has a comparative advantage in. Okay? So what should the US shift its production towards? Planes. It has advantage in planes. What should Germany shift its production towards? Cars. It has an advantage in cars. Oh, you're answering me, Thomas. You answered me at the same time I gave you the answer. So what would that look like? Do you guys have any suggestions? What should the US do? Should it make 40 planes and 0 cars? Should we try that? And should the US make only planes and Germany make only cars? Do you think that would work? This is a yes or no question. I'd love for you to guess. Can we get ourselves into this black? Yeah, Thomas, go ahead.
I'm going to answer, this may be a bit of like speculation, but I would say maybe no, they should not, because even though Germany has the comparative advantage, it probably doesn't have the production capability needed to meet demand. So there may be more demand for cars than Germany can produce.
Great answer. Did you know that answer? Was that a guess?
My imagination.
Well, you were correct. What Thomas just said is correct, which is that if we see complete specialization, what's going to happen is there won't be enough cars to meet the American demand for cars. Remember, we need enough cars that Americans are satisfied, and we get to the upper right quadrant here. We need enough for the Germans to be satisfied, the upper right quadrant here. If Germany is trying to make enough cars for both countries, they're simply not going to do it. There's not enough. So this was, I'm glad you said that, because it saves me the time of showing you what not to do, which is to fully specialize. There is a point I want to make here, though. This isn't just random. I didn't pick these numbers at random. I picked these numbers to say, what does it mean for a country to specialize? It actually depends on how big the country is. The United States has the largest economy on Earth. You guys know that, right? You're lucky. You live in a country with the world's largest GDP. Congratulations. That means we really don't have the capacity to specialize, or at least the incentive to specialize nearly as much as smaller countries do. And it's for exactly this reason that Thomas just said. If the US stopped making cars, there wouldn't be enough cars. If the US stopped making planes, there wouldn't be enough planes. Because our economy is so big, there will always be demand for our products without the need to fully specialize. So in some ways, we're lucky, right? That in order to benefit from international trade, we don't need to fully specialize. But a smaller country does. A smaller country like Germany, they really need to give up all of their ability to make planes. They're not going to make any planes at all. They've got to make all of the cars they can in order to benefit from international trade. So this is what it'll look like. I'm going to draw I'm going to skip right ahead to sort of the answer. Sometimes when I teach this, I give you the wrong answer, and then we see why it's wrong, and then we go on. But I think because Thomas was actually eloquently gave this reason why it's wrong. If the US didn't make any cars, there simply wouldn't be enough cars. So the US is going to maybe specialize a little bit. Germany is going to specialize all the way, and then they're going to trade. Then they're going to trade. Okay, this is how it works. I need a new color, maybe. Maybe, you know what? I can do this. I can do this open circle for what they specialize to. The US, let's say, specializes this much. Oh, well, it's green. Green is fine. And Germany specializes here, right? So blue is their closed economy choice. Green is their open economy choice, okay? Do I need to write that, or will that be clear for people? Blue is closed, green is open. Also, the open circle, maybe that's another like hint visually, like, oh, this is open, this is closed. If they do this you see why it's specialization? Hopefully you understand why it's specialization. It's because, oh, they have arrows here. They have arrows. So the US is giving up some of its car production in order to make more planes. And Germany is giving up its plane production in order to make more cars. I do those arrows there. Perfect. Now what I want to do is trade. What do I mean by trade? Well, in real life, trade is importing and exporting. You know, it's not like you literally swap a car for a plane, right? Nobody's like, okay, I'm Toyota, I'm making, I should have chosen a German. I'm Volkswagen, I'm making cars. Okay, I'm Boeing, I'm making planes. You don't see Boeing and Volkswagen trade each other like some cars for some planes. That's ridiculous. What actually happens is they both just enter the other country's market and sell directly to the consumers in that market. No, I don't want you to think I'm so foolish to think that you literally have people like bartering a car for a plane. That's not how it happens. It happens via international trade and importing and exporting. But we're economists, we simplify it. We're going to think of it like this simultaneously happening, where I'm giving up some cars and you're getting 4 planes. What should that look like? Well, whatever, I'm going to draw an arrow for this country, and it should look exactly the opposite arrow for this country. Didn't you agree? Whatever Germany is giving up, America gets. Whatever America is giving up, Germany gets. So I need an arrow here. I'm going to make it a neutral color. How about green? That will say where I go with my trade. Let's go here. Look at that. That'll get me into the quadrant that I want to be in. I'm wondering if I did this exactly, if I could copy and paste. That would be cool. No, I can't. No? Oh, well. You'll just have to maybe believe me that this, it should be the same arrow, but backwards. Huh. Maybe it's not so believable. Is it believable? This one looks like, they look like a slightly different slope. Okay. What happened here? I think I made this red line, I should have sloped it down more. The red line and the blue line should not be parallel. They should have different slope. And the green arrows should be somewhere in between the two slopes. And they should be the same. I don't know. Is anybody not convinced by this? I think you got to trust me that this is accurate, that we get to this new point here. And these green points do represent more cars and more planes for both countries. And the reason it's possible to do that is the theory of specialization, which says each country can specialize, maybe not all the way, but at least somewhat, toward whatever good they have the comparative advantage in. Then they engage in international trade in such a way as to benefit both countries. Do you guys have any questions about how this could happen? or really what I'm talking about here. This is what we mean by international trade represents a benefit, a global benefit to everyone who can truly engage in it and reap the rewards of it. Of course, there are some bad issues to it. I'm not saying globalization is this universally great thing. There's been a lot of negative things associated to it that we should talk about too. But at least this point, does anybody have any questions about? What about the, oh yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, I was just thinking it does sound, maybe when they specialize, would it be to the extreme of like a single product economy, or it's more that like 70 to 90% of their products are produced by a country or a certain product?
Which country are you talking, are you talking about real life now?
Yeah, about real life.
Well, of course, it depends on the country. So I think I mentioned this, that the smaller the country, the more they need to specialize. There are international trade organizations like the World Trade Organization that is meant to sort of help countries who are trying to get these benefits for international trade. But sometimes they end up having restrictions that are pretty bad for the country, but deemed necessary. And a lot of this is like agriculture. You might see something restricted in some way, or I can't think of a good example. If a small country is somehow vulnerable to this, right? What if you're a small country and you've specialized into something? Oftentimes it's something like textiles. Textiles are cheap to make. Did somebody say something?
Oh, just me. I'll just comment.
Yeah. Well, textiles are something that a lot of countries could produce, but if you specialize too much in textiles and not enough in food production, then if something happens, you could be at risk of a famine, right? If something disrupts the importing of food, maybe it's political turmoil, who knows? You're left vulnerable. And because of this, a lot of countries are reluctant to do what the World Trade Organization asks them to do. And there is an inherent conflict between large countries with developed economies and small countries with less developed economies about, who's actually going to do what's required to benefit from international trade. So really what I want to say is I'm teaching you this now as if like, oh, here's the solution. This is great, isn't it? Whereas I definitely realize there are bigger issues at play that should make you skeptical. Say, actually, I'm not sure everyone really benefits from it the way you say. It's true. There's always actors within countries who may be benefiting too much at the expense of the people, the actual people doing the work. So we have to be careful about that. For the purposes of this class, though, I just want you to know the theory of specialization and comparative advantage leading to at least a Kaldor-Hicks improvement in both countries. So if you understand that, you're good on like a quiz if I ask you about it on the quiz. But like I said, I think I will make it an open book quiz. That doesn't mean you don't need to understand it. You should still understand it before the quiz because I think it'll help you on the quiz. Okay. All right. Should we go back to next slide? I guess I really didn't say too much about the Trump tweet. I don't care that it was Trump said. It doesn't matter who said it. I just want to talk about the idea that when you have a trade deficit, it's like losing money. Because that's really what the tweet is about. Do you guys know what a trade deficit is? You know what imports and exports are. So a trade deficit is when you import more than you export with a country. So, does the US have a trade deficit with China? Yes or no? Yes, big, right? That's what you're going to say, James, before I answered my own question? Sure. That's what the Trump tweet is about. We have a massive trade deficit with China and with most countries. You know who our biggest trading partner is? It's not China. Who's our biggest? What country do we have the most trade with?
Canada.
Correct. Canada is our biggest trading partner. Even them, we have a trade deficit with them, but nobody's saying this lousy mooching Canadians are taking all of our American wealth and keeping it in the land of the. It's because we have a very healthy give and take with Canada. Whereas for China, it somehow seems a little more nefarious that the Chinese government is taking all of our money. Economists really hate this idea that like a trade deficit is losing money, like it's gone. What actually happens to this money that we give to China? Let's say we have a, was it 300 billion? What did he say? It was in the hundreds of billions, 100 billion. In his example, in Trump's example, he says, say we're down 100 billion with a certain country and they get cute. He's talking about China. This was a threat to China, saying, China, if you don't do what we want, we're going to stop trading with you because trade wars are good. Trade wars are easy to win. That's pretty ridiculous, but that was the point of that tweet. Where does that 100 billion actually go? Are we just losing that money? What do you guys think? What do we get out of for that 100 billion that we're losing? Let's say we have a trade deficit, $100 billion trade deficit. Is that money just gone?
No,
What?
I don't think it's gone. I think it's in like the things that we traded for. So whatever that maybe is, like stuff for production, kind of like natural resources can go to make more goods, which in turn can then be traded again. So it's like, I don't know, it doesn't go away. We just spent it.
We spent it. We bought it. Why did we buy it? Why did we buy all this stuff from China? Is it to be nice to the Chinese? Are we being generous to say, China is such a great country, I want to buy stuff from them? Is that why consumers buy so much stuff from China?
No, it's because it's cheaper.
Exactly. It's not just a little bit cheaper. It's way cheaper than we could make it here. Even with the massive transportation cost of putting something on a barge and shipping it across the Pacific Ocean and waiting in line in Los Angeles for it to get unloaded and then shipped in a truck all the way across to some Walmart in Richmond, Virginia, even with all of those massive costs of transportation, it's still way cheaper for them to make it in China. So the fact that we're losing money because of the trade deficit to China is because China is willing to make all of this stuff that we want really cheaply. We should be like, great, thanks, China. You mean you're willing to make this patio furniture for me for $400 less than it would otherwise cost me? Great. You're willing to make this, electronics now. They make electronics. They make everything. You're willing to do all of this, use your resources in the People's Republic of China to make a factory and build something at a fraction of the cost that I would otherwise have to pay? Great. That money is not just being set on fire and disappearing. It's being used to lower our prices and to increase the amount of goods and services that we can afford. This is a principle of microeconomics. When prices go down, utility goes up because you can afford more things. The fact that China is willing to do that, use its resources to make stuff that we want, is actually a benefit to us, not a cost. What about the stuff that we import to them? Is that a benefit to, export to them, sorry, export. That's good for us too. We have companies who want to make things and find people to sell it to so that they can earn some profit. The fact that there's people in China willing to buy it, that's good. The idea that a trade war is good because we'll get rid of those imports and get rid of those exports is pretty ridiculous. It means you're thinking of the trade itself as a zero-sum contest, like who wins and who loses. But actually, you could argue that both the importing and the exporting are good for us. And to get rid of both of them would be bad for us. And that's what happens with the trade wars, that both countries stop trading with each other, or at least the barriers to trade go up and the international trade goes down. So I just think it's a misconception here of what trade is, to even think that that tweet made sense to tweet. And, you know, it's just one guy tweeting, but it represents millions of people who sort of agree that we shouldn't be importing all this stuff from other countries when we should be making it here in the US. Now, I do agree that it does make sense to invest in domestic manufacturing. Great. It makes sense to care about what sort of jobs are available to people in this country. Great. I understand all of that. But the tweet is just so wrong. I had to bring it up when we're talking about international trade, because it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like whoever's winning the trade war, whoever has the deficit is losing, and whoever has the trade surplus is winning. That's just actually not how trade works. You guys have any comments, or do you agree with me? My soapbox a little bit? Sorry. I try to be politically neutral, but I feel like this isn't politics. This is just an economic question about international trade, that a misconception, I can bring it out, just like the SNL thing, right? That was a misconception about how the debt works. And I use that in my class to try to make a point. So sorry if it was a little too political. Guys have any other questions about international trade? We should talk about some of the bad things about it too, right? What do you think? Should I go to my slides, or you just want to have a discussion? I could do a discussion if you guys are willing to discuss. What do you guys think about the race to the bottom? You know what that means?
I think you explained it last class. It's
Oh, I
where,
did.
like,
Yeah. Okay.
like a specific industry will like different countries will not like bid, but they'll try and get the price down low, super low, so that people will like outsource and offshore their like whatever production to there, so that they can they won't have to keep up with like labor laws, and they can make things for super cheap.
Right. Do you think it's good or bad for the world that there's this race to the bottom?
Actually, interesting. I was trying to get into like a different econ school, and I had to do like a interview with the econ professor, and he actually asked me like, "What do you think about the ethics of sweatshops? Because like it prevents people from like being a criminal." And I was like, "Well, you're assuming that poor people will be a criminal in a country." I don't know, but it's interesting because it's like these people now have a job, but this job is super. It doesn't pay well, and the conditions are super poor. And it's like,
Yeah.
is it ethical? Is it ethical? I don't think so.
That's very interesting. I don't have the answer to this question. I have my perspective I could give. Michael, were you about to say something? You can jump in.
It incentivizes the countries to be more exploitive with their labor practices. James just mentioned.
You're talking about race to the bottom now.
Yeah.
But James brought up something that's related, but not quite the same, which is, should sweatshops be allowed to exist? Maybe you think a sweatshop by definition is the result of this race to the bottom, but I think maybe not.
Well, I think there's a point that if these countries weren't able to produce cheaper, there would be an employment problem. You know, this is their strength. This is what they have to offer, is cheap labor.
Yes.
But when you have you know, such a large number of poor nations competing against each other, I think that's where the problem comes in. So that's the downside of globalism. It's not just a country looking to develop who can offer its labor to the more developed nations. It's a lot of smaller, undeveloped countries selling to a few very well-off nations, and so the competition gets so intense that it can create. Well, I mean, it does create. We know in India cases of widespread slavery, and same is true in other countries. But this race to the bottom incentivizes, I think, some of the worst labor and environmental practices. So there's definitely points that the countries' labors are going to be the price of labor in those countries is going to be cheaper anyway. Mm-hmm. But the fact that there's so many competing for such few buyers is I think the problem.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I agree with almost everything you said. That it maybe isn't the fact that there's. I need to mention this idea of a multinational corporation. You guys have heard this before. A multinational corporation usually is like a parent company and a foreign affiliate, where often it's, let's say, America. There's a company in America that is where all the profits go and all the money is made. But there's a foreign affiliate in some other country. It's actually a corporation. It's incorporated in that country according to whatever laws of that country there are. But they're combined to form this multinational corporation. And this sort of, I think this sort of explains a lot of what is happening with labor practices that we don't particularly agree with, and a race to the bottom that we all kind of said was bad. It's that if you're a country and you're trying to decide where to build your factory, you have the money. Multinational corporations often are very rich. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of power, don't they? And if they say, I'm looking for a place to build my factory, should it be here? Or should, if you make me a deal, I could do it here. But if not, I'm going to go somewhere else. The foreign affiliates have this incentive because they're competing with each other. If it was just one place, I don't think this would happen. I think we could all just sort of agree on labor practices that maybe are more universally fair. But because there's this competition among places that could form a multinational corporation, that is a negative aspect of globalization. That's what really we're talking about now is globalization being a good thing or a bad thing. And you guys heard this term before, globalization. It means integrating across different countries, oftentimes forming multinational corporations. Sometimes it's just talking about lowering the barriers to trade, right? Free trade agreements is part of globalization, multinational corporations, and other ways that we're becoming more interconnected on a global scale. It really started in about the 1970s. Globalization is what most people say, about 1970s. It started and it's increased pretty much since. The first half of this lecture was all about how good that could be, how good it could be for countries to specialize and trade and increase their PPF. The PPF doesn't change, but their production is outside their PPF. That's like an economic miracle in some sense, where everyone gets to have more of everything. I think I would be remiss without saying, what about some of the bad things of globalization and some of the exploitation that may occur, right? You have to admit that there's a power dynamic between rich and poor countries. Rich countries simply have more power than poor countries. Poor countries would be more, I'm using poor, I should say undeveloped or underdeveloped countries. They're more desperate for investment. Foreign direct investment is a very important way to get out of poverty. In fact, I wasn't going to show some slides, but let me just show. I think one I have is where'd it go? It has a graph on it. I think I want you to see the graph. This one, share. Yeah, where are we? This one. Percentage living on less than $1 per day in different parts of the world, sort of coinciding with globalization is this reduction of extreme poverty, right? That it could be that more foreign investment in a place results in some labor practices that we don't particularly agree with, but at least it has a much, what the point of this graph is that for most parts of the world, the number of people living in extreme poverty has decreased a lot over time. The sort of exception is sub-Saharan Africa. And you might ask, why would that be an exception for sub-Saharan Africa? I don't know if you guys have studied economic development at all or have some theories about that. What's different? If you look, most of these lines are going down except for this light blue one. It was a lot harder, I think, is my explanation, for sub-Saharan African countries to get foreign investment, to build a factory. They didn't have accessible routes, highways and shipping routes, and the stability of the government to enforce laws wasn't as good. It really, because they didn't get the benefits of globalization, they did remain having high levels of poverty, whereas some of these other regions of the world, especially South Asia and what other parts? East Asia, yeah. East Asia was probably the place that benefited the most from globalization. I mean, think of China. How many factories were built in China between 1981 and 2001 for the purposes of, like I just said, making cheap stuff that was going to be shipped to the US? It's enormous. And it seems to be a big factor in reducing global poverty. So I just didn't want to say only bad things about globalization. Here's some numbers of foreign direct investment. That's when, like I say, you build a factory in another country. That's a type of investment that's important for that country that you're investing in. It's actually about 20% of global GDP. Has this sort of multinational investment feel to it. That's a lot. 1/5 of all of our GDP is multinational corporations. And here's, okay, I'm doing my slides, even though I'm running out of time. The economic argument in favor of transnational corporations is that they streamline the benefits of trade. In other words, you don't have to trade, you don't have to find a market for trade on the open market. You can just directly produce the thing in one country that you're going to sell in another country. Some negative aspects, though, are they can be used as tax shields. I don't think any of us are happy about the fact that really wealthy, really profitable corporations are sometimes able to shield themselves from having to pay taxes. Why? Because they form multinational corporations that, basically protect themselves from having to pay taxes. I think that's a bad thing. Diffusion of responsibility is a bad thing. Okay, running out of time. We've already talked about all these. Winners and losers of trade. How bad are sweatshops really? Even Paul Krugman, he's a liberal. He's a liberal Nobel Prize winning economist. What he actually says about sweatshops is not that they're good, but that they're necessary for developing countries. Of course, it depends on what you mean by sweatshop, but if what you mean by sweatshop is a country or a factory in a country whose labor standards are lower than your country. So if in the United States, we have certain labor standards like a 40-day work week, I don't know what other labor standards we have, lots of them. If there's a country that doesn't have these labor standards and we outsource something to them, it could be, we could feel really bad about it, but some economists argue that it's actually a necessary point for developing countries. So once they develop, then they're going to get the labor standards that we have, and that most people won't have to sort of suffer from these bad labor practices. And I got this quote from the Nike workers in Vietnam. Their demand, most persistent, is that there aren't more factories so that their relatives can be offered a job as well. It's not, It's what they actually would prefer, is having more countries. You guys have any questions? I feel like we should start talking more about the trade agreements, right? Because that's what we're gonna debate Thursday. So for the here's a trade deficit since 1950 for the U.S. It's basically trending down. Our trade deficit is growing, you might say, and we had NAFTA in 1994 to sort of lower barriers of trade. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was signed in 2016, but then we left that. So that was very temporary. We're now in what's called the USMCA, and which is a successor to these free trade agreements, NAFTA and TPP, that if you are maybe looking for a reason to criticize it, sometimes they're managing trade in a way that helps businesses. Often businesses have, industries have the most lobbying influence over how the trade deals are made in the first place. So you could imagine a trade deal that actually is very much protecting the interests of the corporations, but not the workers in these corporations. Also, you might hear about stifling competition. That could actually be bad for consumers. If you make a trade deal that just makes it harder for firms to compete because they have to, let's say, conform to certain some trade regulations, that could be bad for consumers too. And I think we mostly would say that manipulating currency is bad for people in their home country. If in order for them to trade, they have to they devalue their currency to make it more likely to trade. I think we could argue that was bad too. So you can write about that in your comment about the USMCA, which I'm sorry I haven't talked about yet. Let me say a little about protectionism. What is protectionism? It's the opposite of free trade. It's when you restrict or restrain trade between states. And the most normal way that we do that is with tariffs. The tariff is like a tax. A tariff is a tax on an imported good, which of course discourages countries from trading with each other. If we had more time, I would ask you how you feel about protecting strategic interests in weapons or agriculture or oil refineries. Maybe it makes sense to protect those industries. I could understand if you felt strongly that protectionism could be a good thing if we're protecting industries that are vital to our national security. But I'm really against this idea that a trade deficit is the same as losing. That doesn't make sense to me. Let's talk about tariffs. The cost of production is that obviously we pay a higher price. Consumers do, and you could lose jobs in industries because of protectionism. Right? Because let's say you have a tariff against China, they're going to put a tariff on you, and it makes your exports to China difficult, and you may lose jobs in that. For example, in 2002, George W. Bush was the president when steel tariffs were implemented, and they appear to have saved some jobs for American steelworkers, like 1,700 jobs is what the study determined, but it cost approximately $400,000 per job saved. It doesn't really seem to be worth it. It actually lost a lot of jobs in other industries. It put many other manufacturers out of business because of the increase in the price of steel. There's like a $30 million hit to the economy because of these tariffs. What happened eventually was Bush repealed those tariffs. He didn't let them stay too long. It was clear even to him and his economic advisors that those tariffs were not a good idea. Do you guys have a comment? Somebody said a chat. Yeah, 1,700 is a small number of jobs saved. Yes, especially when it corresponds to a $30 million hit to the economy. The point of this slide is to warn against protectionism, that it might feel good to try to protect an industry like domestic steel production and say we're going to have tariffs on foreign steel because we want to save our steel workers. But it's hard to measure, but there are these prices of increases that cause a larger hit to the economy than probably you ever intended when this happened in the first place. Okay, I want to make sure you guys have something to say about the USMCA, which is the successor to NAFTA and TPP. Since I didn't really get into the specifics of it, if you want to just generally write about free trade in your summary, you can. But there are some things about the USMCA that it almost doesn't make the trade any more free than it already was, right? Because before that we had the TPP and we had NAFTA. So the critics of the USMCA, I think mostly are saying, we're not actually making trade more free. We're actually just controlling it more. We're managing it more in a way that forces businesses to coordinate across countries. And it may damage more than it helps. But for the purposes of your summary, it's okay if you want to write about it as a free trade agreement, not just a managed trade, but like what would be the benefits of having it versus not having any trade agreements with Canada and Mexico. I'm okay with that. Hopefully the two debaters on Thursday will give us more details than I gave you today about specifically what might be good about this policy or what might be bad about it. But once again, those of you just writing a summary are not expected to delve too deep into this policy, and you can write more generally about free trade, and that's fine. Do you guys have any questions about that? This was kind of a quick summary of international trade. I think I was maybe the whole time I was planning to do it just in one day, but it's certainly a lot to do in one day. I'll try to maybe I can even make my little picture available, my whiteboard, if you guys want to have that as something handy for the future. You'll have my slides, but you can also have the image, the whiteboard image. This one. It's not perfect, but I think it shows what's going on. Chris, you have your hand raised?
Yeah. Hi, Professor. Quick question.
Sure.
How soon will this Zoom be uploaded?
This Zoom?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Did you want me to upload it?
Yes, please. Just to go over some key points.
Yeah. Maybe I can put it like on a YouTube channel or something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it can be uploaded to Canvas. Maybe, like what file it would be that you could even watch, but that's fine.
Thank you.
You guys have any other questions? We'll have our debate Thursday, as usual, and then final quiz will be after that. Nobody has any